Hello, beautiful souls. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Carolyn, and this channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. I highly recommend subscribing because this channel is definitely a vibe. Let's get right into today's story. Robbie Middleton woke up June 28, 1998, and he was so excited. He burst out of bed with a smile on his face because it was his 8th birthday. School was out for the summer. It was warm and sunny out, and he was excited to be spending the day playing with his friends. Robbie was a very sweet, smart, innocent, wonderful, happy little boy. He planned to spend the day outside playing with his friends in the neighborhood, and then he was going to celebrate with his mom in the evening when she got off from work. Robbie lived in a quiet, safe neighborhood in Splendora, Texas. So Robbie, very excited, headed outside to begin his fun-filled day playing with neighborhood friends. Robbie was running playfully through the woods near his home when he suddenly saw Don Collins. Don Collins was an older boy in the neighborhood, and as soon as Robbie saw him, he was terrified. Don Collins attacked Robbie, beat him up, tied him to a tree, and dumped gasoline on him. Poor little Robbie was terrified, and he begged Don to just leave him alone. But Don was enjoying every single minute of this. He laughed at Robbie, and then he lit a match. Don had just set Robbie on fire. As soon as he had set Robbie on fire, Don ran away. Robbie, fighting for his life, was able to untie himself, get himself on the ground, started rolling around until the fire was out. He was able to get up and run home. As soon as he got to the sidewalk in front of his house, he collapsed. A neighbor who saw him running and collapsing ran over to help Robbie, then went home to call 911 and stayed with the little boy until the ambulance arrived. This sweet little 8-year-old boy had third-degree burns to 99% of his body. When Robbie's mother arrived at the hospital, doctors took her aside and said that most likely he would not survive this. He survived the first few operations that he had to get, but he was in critical condition. And then Robbie's condition improved. He would end up needing over 150 surgeries. These were extremely painful, most of which were skin grafts, that this little boy would spend years going through surgery after surgery. When Robbie's condition stabilized, police obviously wanted to interview him. So when the hospital contacted the police and said, he's stable enough that you could come in and ask him some questions. So that's exactly what they did. At this point, nobody had any idea what had happened. Police expected when they talked to Robbie that they were going to be told that this was an accident. They believed that either Robbie had been playing with fire and it had gotten out of hand, or maybe some other kids had been playing with fire and it had gotten out of hand. But they were shocked when Robbie told them this was done to him intentionally by another child. And Robbie told police that he had been in the forest on the path when he had seen Don Collins, and he told them that he beat him up, tied him to a tree, covered him in gasoline, and set him on fire. Everything that Robbie said was 100% true. But it wouldn't be until many, many years later and a deathbed confession before everyone would know the true horror of what Robbie went through that day. And Robbie was on huge amounts of painkillers. Like, I can't even imagine the amount of pain you would be in where virtually your entire body is covered in third-degree burns. So while he was in the hospital, Robbie was very in and out of really being aware of what was going on, and he started saying that other things had caused the fire. And his mother did say that because he was on so many painkillers, he wouldn't be making a lot of sense sometimes. But she did say once he was clear-minded, not on medication, he did confirm that what he had told the police is what had happened that day. After Robbie had told the police what happened, the police went and arrested Don Collins. Don Collins was put in a juvenile facility to await trial. After a few months, a judge decided there was not enough evidence to go ahead and charge him, so they released him. Police knew that Robbie wasn't lying. They knew without a doubt that Robbie was telling the truth, so they worked tirelessly. I have trouble with words. They worked tirelessly to find any evidence that they could use so that they would be able to charge Don Collins with the assault. Robbie was extremely resilient, and he went through surgery after surgery. As I had mentioned earlier, he ended up needing over 150 surgeries. He was eventually able to go back to school. And initially when he went back to school, there were some kids that were making fun of him and his appearance. And kids are assholes sometimes. But Robbie was a fighter, and he did not let anything get him down. He ended up making lots of friends at school who were very kind and very supportive to him. And in all the stories that I've done, this kid is probably the most inspiring person that I've researched. Like, he's 8 years old and he just has the courage beyond his years. And as great as things were going for Robbie at school, he would be pulled out of school quite often because he had to travel around the entire country, getting different surgeries, seeing different specialists, and he spent a lot of time with other burn victims. And Robbie started getting really passionate about helping these other people that had suffered burns similar to himself. And Robbie became an advocate for burn victims. He started raising money to fund research. He would also hear from other patients that not everybody could afford to get the surgeries that they needed. And he's a little boy. He doesn't know, how crappy the medical system in America is. Like, he can't understand why people who need these surgeries aren't getting them. So he just kept advocating to raise money to pay for surgeries because he wanted everyone that needed these surgeries to be able to get whatever surgeries and medical treatments they needed. And it would have been completely understandable to just be focused on himself. He was 8 when this happened. 150 surgeries, skin grafts, so much pain. Unbelievable amounts of pain. But he cared so much about all the other patients that he would meet and get to know in the various hospitals where he went for treatments and surgeries. But it was many years later, and Robbie had never got justice. Don Collins had never been charged with a thing in relation to this case. Don Collins was a horrible, mean kid. He would beat up kids younger than him. He would beat up kids older than him. He was beating them up in the neighborhood. He was beating up classmates. And when he couldn't take his rage out on other children, he would take it out on animals. It wasn't just kids that were afraid of Don Collins. Adults were very afraid of him as well. He was well known to carry knives and other weapons, and obviously he loved setting fires and would do this all the time. And when he was released for lack of evidence, the parents in the neighborhood were terrified. Like, they're just living their happy little lives. They've got young kids who normally could just play outside in a safe neighborhood. And now they have this like creepy little punk walking around terrorizing everyone. Now, is a kid who does something that violent gonna stop? No. It only gets worse. About 3 years after the attack on Robbie, Don attacked another 8-year-old boy in Splendora, Texas. He pulled a gun on this 8-year-old boy and then he essayed him. We don't know any more details of this attack. That's all that was ever released. Because it was done through juvenile court, the information was sealed, so nobody has any more details other than he attacked another 8-year-old boy, held him at gunpoint, and essayed him. What we do know is he served 4 years in a juvenile facility. And he was 16 during the second attack. How on earth he only got 4 years is absolutely bizarre to me. At 16, you know what you're doing. Yes, absolutely. At 16, you're not an adult and you make some really dumb decisions, but you don't pull a gun and essay an 8-year-old boy. If you are that level of evil at 16, you need more than 4 years in a juvenile facility, but that's what he got. And the juvenile facility that he was in, they were very much focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment, which, I mean, is good. In a juvenile facility, that really should be the focus. And there was lots of programs and counseling and all of these things that Don could have partook in to get some help, but did he? Absolutely not. He didn't do any of it. He just sat there and waited for his 4 years to be up so he could get out and continue terrorizing people. Once he was released, he was then required to register as a sex offender. Did he register as a sex offender? Absolutely not. I don't understand. Let me know in the comments if any of you know why this is. But why do sex offenders have to register themselves? I don't understand why they're not registered automatically. You hear in so many cases of sex offenders, well, they're supposed to register, but they don't, and then they go on and do horrible shit. And to me, can't we find a better system at this point? Because what's going on is not working. So Don Collins disappeared. He went on to commit various other crimes, do drugs, party, and he was just having a good time, I guess. He was eventually caught and charged with not registering as a sex offender, but the punishment was only a couple of months. So he served a couple of months, and in 2011, he was free again. Again, he has to register as a sex offender, and it's his responsibility to do that. And police were looking really hard into Don Collins. Police knew that he was extremely dangerous, and they didn't believe for a minute that he wasn't continuing to commit crimes. Police were looking into a lot of unsolved crimes to see what Don Collins had done, because they didn't believe for a minute that the only crime he had committed was the one he was charged with. They looked at lots of unsolved crimes for burglaries, arson, theft. But what they wanted the most was they wanted him to get charged for what he had done to Robbie Middleton. It had been years since the assault on Robbie, but police could not get it out of their minds. And thank goodness, they kept trying to figure out some way that they could charge him with what he had done. And a deathbed confession will make that possible. During the early 2000s, Don Collins spent it committing crimes, doing drugs, partying, and having a good time. Robbie had spent that time in the hospital, getting surgeries, fighting for his life. In 2011, 13 years after this attack, Robbie Middleton was told that he was not going to survive. And this time the doctors would be right. Robbie had developed a very rare, aggressive form of cancer. And he had developed this cancer as a direct result of the surgeries that he had to get to treat his burns. Robbie was such an amazing fighter, and he spent from the age of 8 until 20 fighting for his life in constant pain. But once Robbie found out that he was no longer going to live, he decided he was going to tell them exactly everything that happened on the day of the attack and what led up to the attack. Shortly before Robbie passed away, he made a videotaped statement explaining everything that happened. In this statement, Robbie revealed that 2 weeks prior to the attack where he was burned, Don Collins had essayed him. Robbie also, in this statement, said that the day that he was attacked and set on fire, he was essayed as well. And he also gave the motive that the reason he was set on fire was to destroy evidence from the essay and to also scare him into not telling the police what had happened. And a few weeks after the statement, just before his 21st birthday, Robbie Middleton passed away. Police, with the statement, now believed they had enough evidence to charge Don Collins. That's right, mofo, you gonna pay. In 2013, Don Collins was shocked when he was arrested, not for assault, but first-degree murder. Doctors testified that the cancer that took Robbie's life was a direct result of the surgeries that he had needed to treat his burns. When the trial finally started in 2015, Don Collins' lawyers tried to argue that the statement from Robbie was not enough evidence. And the judge was like, hell yeah, it is. The judge also let in Don Collins' history with essaying little boys. The judge also allowed witnesses in from the neighborhood. So they brought in parents that lived in the neighborhood, kids who had lived in the neighborhood who had now grown up, and everyone had the absolute same opinion of Don Collins. He was a terror who terrorized children, animals, adults, anyone that he came in contact with. Don Collins was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Unfortunately, because of the prison system in Texas, it is highly unlikely that he will serve the full 40 years. And right after he was sentenced, he looked at his lawyer and said, the bright side is I'll come out of this with an education. But Donnie boy, the type of education you're going to get in prison as a child assayer is not the kind of education you're expecting. I think his education is going to be how child predators are treated in prison. And I am not against it. And that is the truly sad story about Robbie Middleton. He was such an inspiration, and I just hope that his family is doing okay, and it's just tragic. I want to say thank you to everyone who has been subscribing, commenting, watching the video, liking. You guys are absolutely amazing. I love you so much. It really means the world to me to have the channel growing as fast as it is growing. It is beyond my expectations, and it is because of all of you. So thank you so much. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. If you'd like to see more from me, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.